What you're looking at on your screens are visuals of Prime Minister Modi personally giving the Chinese President Xi Jinping a tour of some of the ancient monuments in Malappuram, where the President of China, the President Xi Jinping, is right now for a two-day visit. He arrived in India this afternoon to a grand welcome. This for his second informal meeting with Prime Minister Modi since they met in China's Wuhan in April last year, where we actually saw these visuals in reverse, where it was the Chinese president giving the Indian Prime Minister a personal tour there, and now we're seeing it the other way around. India returning the hospitality that was shown to Prime Minister Modi in Wuhan, the red carpet that was rolled out for Prime Minister Modi in Wuhan. All of this began, this grand welcome began with a tweet by Prime Minister Modi simply saying, "Welcome to India, President Xi Jinping." Now, the two leaders have a packed schedule. It includes, apart from, the tours of the temples of Mahabalipuram, now known as Malappuram, it includes informal, it includes delegation level talks, lunches and dinner meets. But not to be missed is the timing of all this. President Xi's visit comes after the two sides exchanged sharp words over Kashmir. This following President Xi's meeting with the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan just 2 days ago. In a statement after that meeting, China said that it was paying close attention to the current situation in Jammu and Kashmir, and that it opposes any unilateral actions that complicate the situation. Though there was a rejoinder, the foreign ministry said in China is well aware of India's position, and it is not for other countries to comment on the internal affairs of India. So I want to go back now to my guests. We have Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar, Director of the Society for Policy Studies, and Atul Aneja, who is the Hindu's correspondent there, who's joining us from China. So, in the first half of this bulletin, we discussed the optics, all the low-hanging fruit, the expectations being very low and set very low by the MEA. But now I want to focus on the elephant in the room. Let's talk about how this relationship really has now been complicated by the Pakistan factor. What are we expecting Prime Minister Modi, Commodore Bhaskar, first to say to President Xi about whether Beijing should be more sensitive towards India's concerns on Kashmir? Pakistan has always been an issue when it comes to India-China relations, but now it just seems to have gotten a lot sharper.
Well, Sarah, I would say there are two strands here. One is, I think, the whole challenge of terrorism, and we are aware that Prime Minister Modi, even going back to Modi 1.0, when he assumed office in 2014, has been drawing global attention to the challenge of terrorism and urging what he often calls as a collective response. Now, it's within the region that China, being the proximate neighbor of both Pakistan and India, has provided what can only best be described as uncritical support. And no amount of exhortation by India has made any difference, because it's not as if China does not know. I mean, the whole global community, from political leaders to intelligence agencies to all the security professionals, are aware of the fine print as to how Pakistan is invested in terror. That's not news. I think for Prime Minister Modi, the challenge would be to convey this to President Xi Jinping in as persuasive a manner as is possible, to say that this is really the bone that sticks as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned. And is there any way of quarantining it? Because I'm repeating this point, it would not perhaps be prudent or practical to expect that China can in any way de-link from Pakistan, which seems to be on the wish list of, as I said, some of the interlocutors that we mentioned earlier. I don't think that's going to happen. But can we quarantine that and then move on to the other, which is an equally complicated issue, which is the moment you talk about Kashmir, and Prime Minister Modi has taken this decision on August 5th, it is a very, very major domestic political decision for him. Now, this links up with territoriality, and both India and China have very high sensitivities on territoriality. China Tibet, China Taiwan, China Hong Kong. For India, today the Kashmir issue has got more complex because China is sitting on one part of the composite state of Jammu and Kashmir as it existed in October 1947. So these, I think, are the kind of issues that perhaps Prime Minister Modi would be able to convey, because the next link is with BRI. If you recall, the reason why India had opposed China or did not join BRI was again because of territoriality.
Yes.
So I think these are the issues, that terrorism, territoriality, and the way in which China has positioned itself. Is there any give that India could possibly expect? And if so, what is the most practical way of doing it, considering, let me repeat this, India has not said a word in public about Hong Kong. It hasn't said anything about the detention of the Chinese citizens of Muslim faith. And I think these are issues that Beijing is keenly aware of. Sarah?
Despite Beijing actually bringing up human rights issues, despite all of this at the UN when it comes to Kashmir. But Atul, you know, the former National Security Advisor, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, has argued that China is leaning more now towards Pakistan. Like I've said, Pakistan's always been an issue when it comes to Indo-Chinese relations, but it seems to have gotten worse. And according to Mr. Menon, at least, this is because of the thickening of India-US ties. He says this has provoked a natural rebalancing, leading China to move closer to Pakistan that India was slow to anticipate.
Yeah. To respond to your question, the first thing, that the Chinese understand that if their Belt and Road Initiative is to fly, then Kashmir has to be resolved. Bhaskar mentioned about CPEC, and that's their flagship program for the BRI. So it's interesting that since March this year, Foreign Minister Wang Yi has gone on record to say that China is interested in mediating on Kashmir. He used this remark in March this year, which of course India rejected. Now, thereafter, at the Bishkek SCO summit, I've been told that President Xi himself broached the subject of mediation of Kashmir with Prime Minister Modi, which was again politely declined, as Prime Minister Modi politely declined when President Trump offered to mediate. But the Chinese are persistent on this. Now, Bishkek summit takes place in June. Now we have the third dimension of August 5 coming in, where the situation changes. And that's where the linkage with the Quad becomes even more intense. And there I agree with the former Foreign Secretary Shiv Shankar Menon, that with India, in response to what happened to the Chinese response to August 5, went ahead and did two things. One was postpone the border talks, which are supposed to be held in September between NSA Doval and Foreign Minister and State Counsel Wang Yi. The second step which India took was in last month at the UNGA, when it agreed to raise the level of Quad meeting from joint secretaries to the level of foreign ministers. So there is a shift in that position. Now, what has China done in response? There's a back and forth going here. Before coming to India, China literally summoned both the pillars of power in Pakistan. Not only did Imran Khan come over there, but Army Chief Qamar Javed Bajwa was there, and the ISI Chief, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, was also in Beijing just 2 days ago.
Correct.
Now, that I think is a linkage with what's happening in the Quad. Meaning that if India goes and weaponizes Quad, in the sense goes ahead and beyond what it's done now, then the signal is clear that China will bond even closer with Pakistan. And I think that's the two equations which come into play when President Xi lands here in Mamallapuram and right now beginning his talks with Prime Minister Modi.
That's right. I read your piece in The Hindu where you're saying that Beijing also has a plan B if the strategic calculus of both these neighbors doesn't work out. So what you're saying is because President Xi is personally also invested in the China-Pakistan economic corridor, he's particularly keen that Kashmir has to be resolved for that to move forward.
Sure. Sarah, just to clarify here, I think from the Chinese perspective, when I sit here, there is no zero-sum game from the Chinese side. For the Belt and Road, China needs both India and Pakistan. It's not the zero-sum. It's not either India or Pakistan. And I think that's where, from the Indian perspective, we have to understand that Chinese will not abandon Pakistan. especially given the fact that Pakistan gives China strategic access to the Indian Ocean through Gwadar because it wants to avoid passing it straight to the Malacca Strait. So this is a strategic objective, and this is what will bind China and Pakistan. While, with the trade war coming in and China being further squeezed by the Americans, China wants a relationship with India as well, and a bigger trade relationship and trade and investment relationship, and as well as other parts of the world, also on the global issues like climate change, etc. So there is a bigger framework within which the China-India relationship is being sort of located.
All right, I want to talk about, the third angle here in the equation, of course, the economy right now. But quickly, Atul, since you're in Beijing, before I go into a short break, if you can just quickly tell us, what is the press coverage like in China over this visit? What are the Chinese expecting out of this?
Well, the Chinese, you see, they have actually been very positive about this visit. We had the briefing day before yesterday, and Chinese state media has gone and given extensive coverage to the Chinese perspective on this visit, which is quite positive. And as we speak, the China Global Television Network is on, and they are giving the same visuals that you are showing on your channel. So there is considerable interest and also a spin given by the Chinese, which is pretty positive, and sort of isolating it from the other contentious issues which we have spoken of.
All right. Thanks so much. I'm going to come back to both of you. Let's quickly try and take a short break. Come back. Again, we have these visuals playing out from Malappuram, Prime Minister Modi in a veshti, perhaps for the first time, sitting there in diplomacy over coconut water with Prime Minister Xi.